gentlemen. I don't feel so outnumbered.
Sorry, yeah.
My name's Doug Lloyd. I'm the Wildlife Trust Officer for the Wildlife Trust of South and West Wales in Ceredigion. Bit long, but that's what we've got. My role is varied, shall I say, but a big part of it is managing our nature reserves within the county, which is, I think we've got 21 nature reserves, so most of my work is doing that, this sort of thing. Landscape work, working with neighbours and partners and so on. I'll try and be reasonably quick with some of it because I've got a fair few slides to go through. That's quite a strange colour to it compared to mine. Can I just have a look?
Do some.
It's okay, I mean, it looks slightly sepia in tone as if it's an old photo, but it's not. Yeah, turn the lights up and see if it makes it any better.
Yeah. Ah, that's better.
That's better, yeah. It looked like an old sepia photograph to me there. So I'm going to talk about the main habitats found within the county. There's quite a lot that I won't talk about because it'll take too long, and a lot of them will relate to some of our nature reserves. This is a site called Llanafan up on Mynydd Bach between Llanafan and Bronant. You can maybe just make out the lake there in the distance. But this is an area of bog. I just want to show this. There's quite a variation within this in habitats, from bog to sort of dry heathland, more improved agricultural fields, woodland, scrub and so on. So, as a scene setter, it works good. Again, that colour doesn't... We'll just have to go with it, I think.
I'm sorry, I don't think the projector is brilliant.
Yeah, the colour on the screen is different to that.
The colours aren't coming out great.
It can disguise my poor photos in that, so that's good. So we'll start with grasslands. I mean, grassland habitats are very broad, and I'd like to think everyone would sort of recognise what a grassland is. It's got grass in it. It's fairly straightforward. But there's a big difference between a lot of our dairy type pastures, very improved, lots of fertiliser, and some of the more traditional habitats like this one. This is at a site called Llanafan, which is at Llanafan, just by the golf course there. It's an example of an old hay meadow community which would have been very common 70, 80 years ago. We've lost a lot of this habitat in the last, especially 50 years, but 50 to 70 years or so. Due to intensification of farming, really, which is mainly because of the availability of inorganic fertiliser. So these were a fairly sustainable habitat in terms of their management, in that all they had on them would have been muck from the animals and lime. Can you read this bit at all? Or not really? No. I'll read it out then. So it says SSSI, which is Site Special Scientific Interest because of its importance for wildlife. It's a very species-rich habitat. There are somewhere around 150 to 200 flowering plant species on this site. As I said, the decline's been very large in this group of habitats. In Britain, it's about 97% have been lost. In Wales, it's about 92%, which, sounds positive, I suppose. Compared to 97% loss, I don't know. I've put there less than 500 hectares in Ceredigion. In old money, that's, 1,200 acres, but that's a very high estimate on my part, because the figures for these sorts of things are very vague and difficult to get. So I would say it's more like 200 hectares, but even so, at 500 hectares, that's what I put there, 0.002% of the county is now made up of this habitat. Whereas in the past there would have been, these fields would have been in every area, every district. so a few species in here, and this is a not looking very good in this photo, I'm afraid. This will be a heath-spotted orchid, because it's slightly acidic habitat, and the six-spot burnet moth on it, which is a grassland day-flying moth. We've got pink waxcap fungi, which are, if you see pink waxcap, they look pink, they don't they? They look, I'm not entirely sure what they look, they're very bright. They're also called ballerina waxcap because the cap does look like a sort of ballerina's tutu, it's that sort of look to it. But they are a good indicator, and they indicate that the habitat hasn't been ploughed or fertilised in the last 30, 40, 50 years or so. Over on that side, that's a greater butterfly orchid, which are fairly uncommon. You only really find them in these sorts of grasslands. And there are about, I think, 2,500 of those at this site, which is probably the highest in the county. And a whole host of other species, which I won't go into, but they're a very rich habitat, managed in a traditional way. This is just to show you some of the complexities of saying we've got a certain amount of land of this type or that type. This border shows you the site. So the photos are taken from within the middle of the fields, but the habitat itself will be recorded as about 3 hectares of this grassland, but you can see there's a lot of woodland on this. And the main thing I want to point out on here is that we have this photo with all the bluebells is taken from within there, as is this with the primroses. So you would expect, therefore, to say that's an ancient woodland or an ancient hedge. But I don't know if any of you have seen or read the book Tyr that Carwyn Graves did, but he came here and we were looking at this site, and all of these internal hedges are not shown on the tithe map from about 1830, so they're all less than 200 years old. Which goes to show you how rapidly things can change, because this woodland flora within the grassland is, apparently showing an ancient woodland flora, but it's not. It's very rapid in change. Having said that, we've got some much rarer tree species here. We've got wild service, which in the county, probably there are only perhaps 10, 15 sites with that tree in the county. Mainly because it has a more southern distribution, but it just sort of hangs on in Ceredigion. But they're actually on the hedge along the old sunken lane there, so you can kind of get an idea of age of things then from looking at your habitats. What else is to say there? Management. So, as I said, they were hay meadows, but the reason it hasn't been improved for agriculture is because it's like that, on very steep slope, very small field systems. You can't make hay on it anymore, so it's just grazed. So without working with local farmers and local graziers, we couldn't manage these sites. Again, you won't be able to make that out very well, but that is a lay hedge, because we're trying to continue to manage these hedges in the sort of traditional way, otherwise they just keep expanding, and before you know it there's nothing left, hence what's going on here. There's a little bit about management, and again that's just another photo within the grasslands showing some betony and so on from Southfield. Okay, so again still on grasslands. I should have said that type of grassland is what's called a mesotrophic grassland, literally a middle nutrient grassland. It's neither high nor low in nutrients. But you also get acid grasslands, which are low in nutrients, and they tend to be on more acidic soil types, thin soils, that sort of thing. These photos are taken around the Llanafan area, and there's a mosaic of habitats up there. I think it's quite important to say that we can talk about habitats in isolation, but they all join together and link, and there's subtle differences between them. And it's often that mosaic from a wildlife perspective that's the the benefit, you know. They require sort of scrubby edges. You know, here you've got an acid grassland, which is quite species poor. It's lacking a lot. They're naturally species poor. Nothing's happened to them. But because of the poor soil conditions, there are a limited amount of specialist plants that will grow there. And you can see it sort of grades into heathland and scrub. So on some of the bare areas on there where there's a bit more shelter as well, you have things like lizard, added to some extent as well on some of these sites. Bilberry, I'd like to think everyone would recognise that, which is fairly common in the acid grasslands. This is one that you will find in gardens, but this is lady's mantle, which, but this species here is one of the true wild ones. A lot of the garden varieties are very big. They are cultivars. They're not the wild variety. And the top corner is what most people would call a dandelion, but there are, I think, 60 or 70 species within that group. Cat's ears, hawkbits, hawkweeds, all manner of things. Goat's beard, that's probably the best named one, I would have thought. And you can maybe just make out a tiny Llanafan in there, a tall till. So it lacks species, but the species it's got are particular to that type of habitat. What else is there? So often these acidic grasslands are found on commons or areas of common land which are dry commons. In Ceredigion we've got a reasonably high proportion of land that's common. We started early, sorry. I'll let you sit there. So yes, we've got about 7% of the county is common land. So a lot of that land, all that land is unimproved. It's not being improved for agriculture when it's still common, because it's got multiple rights for people to use it. It consists mainly, on the drier areas, it will mainly consist of this habitat, an acid grassland. I'm not really going to talk about the other type of grassland just yet, because we don't really have it in Ceredigion because of the geology. Again, that looks a bit scary, some of those colours, but the point of this map, this is up above Llanafan. So the Tavy is down here and Lampeter's over there somewhere. The reason I want to show you this map of the area where those last photos were taken is just to show the mosaic that's going on here. You've got all sorts of rougher areas of more acidic grasslands and wet grasslands, lots of overgrown hedges and trees and woodland. Obviously this is a more modern conifer plantation. This is an area I've surveyed quite a bit this year because of proposed wind farm and power line through there, which I want to use this map to show why you can, or how rather, you can pick out some of the areas that are still likely to be good wildlife habitats and are unimproved, because when you look at even though the colours are wrong, we'll ignore the colours, but the greens in these bigger fields are much more unnatural looking, shall we say, than in some of these smaller field systems. So where you still have those smaller field systems, it's far less likely they've had modern agricultural improvement, which tends to be where you find a lot of the remaining best bits of wildlife habitat. But there's all sorts of things up there. It's a very interesting area. From a historical perspective, let me get this right, this road is San Helen, so that goes from Llanafan over to Dollacothy, and what I find interesting is that at this end, the Llanafan end, you've got old silver mines, and Dollacothy end, you've got gold mines. So the Roman road network was not really anything of the sort. They were just continuing the link between old sites that were already being utilised. But in the landscape context, these field systems are all linked to, I think, 17th into the 18th century, what's called common enclosure, where people were moving onto the common and settling, and small field patterns were being hacked out. but they were all silver miners, and a lot of the names of the houses still contribute to that. So there's quite a lot you can say when it comes to habitats and linking it to the historical usage of the area. I think that does it for that one. Oh no, hang on. Okay, so I want to just point this out. So I said that this was all a common before it was enclosed. Now, we tend to think of most human activity from a wildlife perspective as being destructive, but all of this area would have been an upland common of acidic grasslands. But there are fields up there, because they've had muck put on them and lime put on them, have agriculture improved them in an old-fashioned sense to become more like the first slide I showed you of the hay meadow type grasslands, which are actually more species rich than the acidic grasslands. So there's a lot of interplay, if you like, between habitats moving from one to the other depending on what happens. So I would say in this area, human activity, at least in the past, was largely beneficial from a wildlife perspective. So that's with lime and muck in particular. Heathland, again looking rather bright. This adder looks quite sinister with these colours. So yeah, this is a piece of heathland down at Plump in the southern part of the county. Heathland again, there's that sort of link between heathland and acid grassland. Acid grassland and heathland are very similar, but they're defined as separate habitats because acidic grassland tends not to have what you need on heath, which is heather, because of past management, grazing mainly, so they've been overgrazed to some extent. This site again is probably an old common. It's got multiple old ditches through it which are attempts to drain it and improve it for agriculture, but largely they failed. It's still very wet. Again, I won't go into talking about wet heaths and humid heaths and dry heaths. There's all manner of technical terms you can go into, but heathland, it's got heather on it, tends to have gorse. In this case, this is fairly wet. There's a reasonable amount of scrub coming into there. The sorts of species you're supporting, though, are things like adder. I mean, I think heathlands, again, you've got a very low nutrient status, so the plants tend to be smaller. They don't grow very well, and in my mind, that is the top predator on a heathland because of the size of everything. It's a miniature habitat. I could sort of think of heather and gorse as being, in effect, the tree canopy. You move all the way down to the ground, and you've got these very bare areas, and they have things like, I mean, again, sorry, you can't really see in this photo, but this is all a lichen, all this sort of white-green coloured thing. Again, it's something that would not do well under competition from other plants. So that low nutrient status means that other plants that are rarer get a chance to have a foothold on habitats like this. We've also got in this case, poorly named green hair streak, which I would say looks like a yellow hair streak or ochre or something. Again, almost a heathlands and acidic grasslands specialist. You won't find it on anything else because its food plants there are some other habitats, but the food plants for it tend to be bilberry, broom, gorse, those sorts of species which you'll find on heathland. This little one's a forester moth, which it feeds on common sorrel and sheep sorrel, which are grasses that grow on mainly acidic type habitats, so acid grassland and heath in particular. And that's just a map of the area to give you again the context. This is the site we were looking at there, that's Penavour. The colours on this actually show it quite well, so you can almost make out the purple colour of that. Sections of this site as well. This is called Rospilbach Penavowr, triple SI. This is another one called Rosgethlia. This is another little site called Rosmarin, triple SI. Again, I think this photo shows quite well the more modern fields, if you like, slightly bigger field systems, more or greener, and a lot of this is dairying land around there. Although I would point out you can't judge it all from from aerial photos, because this field here, which doesn't look particularly special, it's not actually owned by us, that's another site, is a really nice piece of hay meadow. So you can tell a lot from aerial photos, maps and so on, but you have to actually get on the ground before you can, say for definite what's there. This sort of swathe through the middle sits in a low valley, so it's quite wet, which is why I think largely these sites have been retained and not improved. But even on those poor agricultural areas, there are still threats. I mean, this pool, these series of fishing pools here were only put in about 2010, I think. And before that, that was heathland. And this forestry plantation, even on the aerial photos, you can make out from 15, 20 years ago, before it, well, just when it had been planted, you could see that it was all heathland as well. Hopefully, these things don't happen too much anymore, but there are always a lot of bad decisions made, should I say, or bad decisions based on poor information, I think. I think that's it for there. Yeah, okay. That looks okay, doesn't it? So arguably this is probably the most important habitat we have in Ceredigion, which is Rhos. As I say there, Rhos, rush pasture, culm grassland as it's called in Devon, marshy grassland. It's quite a broad, almost group of habitats, in that it will have bits of heathland in there and bits of dry acid grassland. There might be some bits even of the hay meadow type grassland, but it is a rush pasture, a wet grassland, which is fairly common in the county. Having said that, a lot of it has had agricultural improvement still, but there are a lot of areas still which are still in quite good condition from a wildlife point of view. In fact, the main threat to this habitat in the county is abandonment, because it's awkward to manage because they're too wet. Sheep, you can't graze sheep on it because it's too coarse. It has purple moorgrass growing on it, which sheep just won't touch. To graze it with cattle, it's not really. Dairy cattle are not really going to gain enough, weight and be healthy enough off this sort of grazing. So it's traditional breeds really. So where you have old breeds of cattle and horses and ponies as well to some extent, graze these areas. What have I put there? 3,900 hectares in Ceredigion. I mean, again, don't really believe the figures. That's just what it will tell you on some report somewhere. But the point of the figure is that it's 2.5% of the county. When it's talking about this marshy grassland, it'll be talking about the highest quality marshy grassland that hasn't had improvement and is managed poorly and so on. But that's 12% of all of the horse habitat within Wales is within Ceredigion. As I say, a mosaic again, but it's worth showing you a few things. Bottom corner is marsh fritillary, which I'll talk about a bit more in a minute. Again, Rhos being the most important habitat in Ceredigion, I'd say marsh fritillary is probably the most important species in the county, and that's in an international context. This is, again, you can't really see it too well, but this is a pingo, which is a glacial feature, post-glacial feature of, in effect, you have underground springs in glacial, periglacial environments which form a block of ice. After the ice age, that ice melts and leaves a hole in the ground that forms to make a pool, which covers over with moss. So when I've walked across this, and feels distinctly like you're about to fall through it. So it's, yeah, you know something's under there. I usually describe it to people that don't know what a pingo is like, this is not a nice description, but I think it's quite accurate. It's like a tooth with the gums around it. When the tooth rots, you're still left with the gums around it. They fill in with water. So that's how I think about pingos. But they're, again, a feature that you'll find within the horse habitat. This is at a site called Llanafan, which is down at Gorskog. This, even the colours are wrong on this. These colours are pretty accurate. This is a scabious sawfly, which feeds on scabious, this flower here, as does marsh artillery. And it really is gold banded in this way. It's this fantastic colour. I've only ever seen one adult, but I've seen lots of caterpillars of it. What else? This is world caraway, another specialist species on the Ross habitat. And lesser spearwort in the far corner, which is a buttercup, in the buttercup family, but it only grows on these sorts of habitats. What else is on there? So, again, this is from our own records. 222 flowering species and about 300 invertebrate species recorded. That's just from the data we've got. That'll be a huge underestimate, because I've done this before on other sites. When I was working in Herefordshire, we had an expert who lived locally and he recorded everything. And after about 5 years, we got to, in total, including all of the groups, we got to 2,200 species on one site. So it shows the problem with the data. If there's no one to record it, we don't know anything. So it's very much more than perhaps these figures would lead us to believe. Okay, that's a map of the site. Some of the things are marked on purely because I've taken them off my Google Earth pages, but these are the pingos here. You can make out there the different vegetation within it, and even within this site, which is horse pasture, wet grassland, marshy grassland, there are some very dry areas, and then there are these areas of purple moorgrass and scrub and woodland. That's a stream going through there that feeds into the Tavy. Lots of mixtures of habitats. So a few other things on here. That's a narrow-bordered beehawk moth, which is another specialist of horse habitat, which is rare as well, like marsh fritillary. These are marsh fritillary caterpillars in their web, but it doesn't look very impressive, I have to say. Well, let's have a go with it. This is a frog orchid, which I've never seen at Llanafan, but they were last recorded in 1985, I think. This species highlights what I was saying before about agricultural improvement can be beneficial. So liming and muck, as I was mentioning before, used to happen on this site until the 60s, I think. 60s, 70s, I think it was. This is a species that needs neutral to slightly alkaline conditions. So, in effect, the farming practices increase the amount of wildlife there to some extent. It's just more modern agriculture that's hit it. So it's just that sort of balance. What does that say? Species frog orchid. Oh, okay. So ag slag. The ag slag is the old steel working waste that was made into an agricultural improvement project. That's what the material. They used to put that on here, and it's high in all sorts of nutrients. So it's possible that type of management with an industrial waste product actually improves wildlife value. So, and the only other site we know of with this species in the county had exactly the same management in the 60s, 70s, and 80s. So there's a few asides that could be quite interesting, perhaps. Yeah, okay. So we've got a few slides on marsh fritillary now, but I do want to talk about it a little bit. As I said, horse habitat is the most important habitat, I think, by far in Ceredigion, and marsh fritillary is the sort of star species, if you like, from cross pastures. This one's had a bit of a pecking. You can see a few holes in it. So that's late on in the season, but this photo was taken at Rosglyn Britheg Agos, I think it is in Welsh. And have we got any first language Welsh speakers here? No. So brith, as in from Barabrith, speckled bread, is the same root word as, so Britheg Agos is Britheg of the bog, if you like. But in English, it's marsh fritillary, and fritillary is from fritillaria in Latin, and brith and frith are both from the same root word, so they're both speckled. Yeah. Although I think in Latin it means checkerboard pattern. It's that checkerboard pattern. So it's a bit faded, this one, but it's a checkerboard pattern basically. So speckled, checkered, whatever way you want to think of it. Anyway, that's just an aside in words. What's the next one? Again, that sort of works as a picture. So, scabious, again, that's its larval food plant. Without scabious, it doesn't survive. If it's grazed too heavily, you don't have the tussocks and things that it needs. So it needs a mosaic, again, a mix of habitats within, pardon me, the cross pasture. So there's been huge declines, Europe-wide. Its distribution is Europe and into Asia, I think, but it's a slightly more Western distribution. I think in Europe it's been lost from, Belgium, Holland, maybe Denmark as well, possibly Germany. And its strongholds, or traditional strongholds, were in some of the southern parts of Europe, places like Romania, where they're undergoing a lot of agricultural improvement and drainage, so it's losing out there, which basically means West Wales, western parts of Britain, are now one of its international strongholds. I think, what we got there, 79% decline in distribution. This is worldwide, I think, a 10% decline in abundance in the last 30 years. So like I say, the UK is considered a stronghold for the species, and so West Wales is the basic international significance for it. This is one of the latest butterfly conservation maps, but again it shows you what the problem with not having records, because so this is the Cumbria population, and so the coloured dots, red is for sightings of adults, red is 10 plus, orange is 2 to 9, and the yellow is 1, just 1. But it was declared extinct in Cumbria in 2004, so all those records are in effect pre-2004, but it has been rediscovered last year, and the numbers have gone up, so it's now at 1 site in Cumbria. And of these sites in Lincolnshire, there's 1 left. And it's declined quite a lot in the southwest of England as well. The positive is that in Ceredigion, that picture is wrong, because no one surveys for them. So we found a lot of sites in the last few years, which probably fill in most of these gaps. It doesn't go further north. There do seem to be some gaps between here and Cadair Idris. I think this is Cadair Idris population, I think. Let's have a look, what's the next one? And I hope you can see that. Every shape on there that's got 4 lines coming out of it is a marsh fritillary population. The point of the lines is that they, in theory, have a 2 kilometre radius that they would go out into and find new habitat, because they move through habitats that, if habitat becomes unsuitable, they'll move. There's also a wasp that parasites them. If that parasite load becomes too much, they'll also move and try again somewhere else. They have to have lots of land, even if they're not using it all. So these are all the current sites that we know of in the county. The red ones are ones off the map that they're now extinct on. So there's a sort of a line through Ceredigion of which they are not found beyond, even though there were some historic populations further north. But in the last, 3 years, I think, 2 or 3 years, we found, what have I put there, 7. 6, yeah, I think 7 is fair enough. With all these figures, it depends how you count them. I think there's 26 marsh fertility sites in the county. I went on Google and used artificial intelligence. It says there's 12, so what do they know? And again, the 7 new sites, it depends how you count them. Because the area at Llanafan, where we found marsh fertility, you could argue it's 2 or 3 sites because they're in different locations. But it's one meta population. They need these big areas to survive in. What's that? 14 sites extinct since 1937. Again, that depends on how you count it. I don't think some of them are extinct from looking at the habitat. I think people just haven't looked. And 7 new sites. So we're doing reasonably well within the county, but the range has still shrunk to some extent within the county because we've lost them from further north. Well, I say that, no one looks. So, and it's not an area I really go up to because it's I don't know some of the landowners so much up there. Yeah, so as I say, if a tree falls, or rather if a marsh cricket flies, no one there around to see it, who knows? It doesn't count. I've met so many farmers who you show pictures of them to, or you see them flying, they go, oh yeah, I know them, we've had them for years. And you think, yeah, but this is a new site, because no one knew about it. So you have to know it's important before you can tell someone, I suppose. And this is just our volunteers surveying for it. Almost the whole of September with our volunteer team has taken up doing marsh fertility web counts. So the photo we had before with the caterpillars, they're in a web to protect themselves at this time, August through to early October. And the best way to survey for them, to know where they've bred, is from looking at webs and caterpillars, because you can count adults, but you don't know where they're actually using. They fly around quite a lot. So that's what we do with volunteers through September, of which my time, 2 days a week we're out with volunteers, Wednesdays and Thursdays. But in terms of the habitat, where to find them in the county, it's the sorts of habitats we've already looked at, unimproved grasslands and heaths. But they need scabious, they have to have scabious, the purple flower. They have to have tussocks and different structures, if you like, within the habitat, because they like being sheltered. If you ever watch female butterflies looking for where to lay their eggs, it will take them a long time to decide. They're very, very, I shouldn't use the word fussy, they're being maternal, I suppose, but they're very, very good at it. I watched not the same species, but I watched a wood white female looking to lay eggs years ago. That's another very rare species. This was in Herefordshire. And she landed on, I would say, 50 different plants before she chose the one that she was going to lay on. And they use their feet because they've got chemical sensors in their feet. But, sorry, going back to this. So you need that habitat mix, that mosaic, the structural difference within it for protection. But yeah, if there are areas, with scabious and with tussocks or rushes, that sort of habitat in, it's quite possibly a useful place to look for marsh fertility. So it's definitely worth looking out for them anyway, or making me or someone like me aware of where they are. Because in effect, there's me and there's Paul Taylor, who's the butterfly reporter for the county, and a few other volunteers who are trying to get a better understanding of this. And harking back to the Llanafan site, where the power lines are proposed to go through, that set of power lines, the route goes right through the main population there, or is proposed to. Not only that, it goes through, as far as I can tell, 2 other marsh fertility sites in Carmarthenshire. So the route they've chosen is appalling, but I have tried to engage them a bit better. to slightly modify their route. It would be cheaper for them in the long term, but you know that's how they are, I suspect. We'll see how that goes. That's it for that, I think. Yeah, that top photo looks like an inland sea, doesn't it? That's that is actually a bog up above Llandewi Brefi. This one here, called Blaen Vigin Brefi. Vigin apparently means morass, so it's that sort of wasteland, expanse of wasteland, if you like. And this was a site that was managed by the Trust years ago, but it's owned by NRW, and it was, at the time, it was Forestry Commission Wales, so you can see the conifer plantations around the edge. I'll show you a map of that in a minute, but it had conifer planted on it, but the very wettest bits they just couldn't plant on because it is so wet. So this is bog habitats now we're talking about, of course, in Welsh. There's a permanently high water table. They're acidic. They are, as I say, they're dominated by bog mosses, so they're sphagnum mosses. I've got a picture of sphagnum moss on there, but it holds a lot of water and can grow. So in the county we've got, of course, Caron at Tregaron and Cwrs Fawcett are both bog. This is another example of a very big bog within the county, and there are lots of them in the uplands. This is another photo from Vigin Blaen Brefi. I hope you can tell both of these photos are from the 1980s. I just quite like the colours in this one. They give a very different view of it. But you've got these sort of peat hags in there and bits of bog, open water and mosses here, heathers, all sorts of other plants within. We've got sundew and butterwort in the far corner, which are both insectivorous plants. We talked about acid grasslands having low nutrients, but bogs have even lower nutrients for most species. So the only things that grow there are things specialised to grow in that environment. Sundews and the butterwort, being insectivorous, derive their needs for some of the nutrients that they can't get, such as, and it's mainly nitrogen from the insects they catch. So both of them are very sticky. And if you see on the butterwort, the leaves are inrolled. So once a fly gets in, it can't even try and climb out because it's stuck. This is bog asphodel, which is another bog species which is not, I can't remember what the Latin is, but the Latin translates as bone breaker, because farmers would graze the habitat with bog asphodel on, and bog asphodel was an indication of very low calcium levels, so they tended to have weak bones, so hence the name. What else is on there? Yes, I've just said under there, species diversity is low, so there aren't many species you'll find on these at all. You can become a bog or heathland expert in a couple of years, but there are very, very specialised species. That's for plants anyway. In terms of insects, that's a different matter. There's all sorts of, thousands of insect species. But again, this is a bit like what I said about heathlands. They're a habitat almost in miniature. You don't find big animals on them and big plants. Everything is very small. So they tend to be more important for things like insects, mosses, lichens. This is the cover slide. So this is Llanafan. I want to show this one again because this site has what is, well, it's sort of like what's called a Schwingmoor, which is a German term, which is sort of what it sounds like. You walk on it and it moves around. So it's bog moss and peat over the top of water. So this lake is a post-glacial lake, which is, from this end, is dammed, or was dammed, and over time vegetation has built up and formed this peat raft, which is, it's a peat raft across the top of the water, so that's very wet. And these bits that stick out are actually rock outcrops and you can follow the line of them and see and note the geology of the area up there. And they're completely different. They're very dry, with dry heath and grassland on. This is that's another photo of one of the pingos at Llanafan, because in effect the pingos are bogs really. They're not heathland. They're not cross or heathland. This is showing defining things gets complicated because they all intermingle. The bottom corner is it looks quite drab, but that's a large heath butterfly. Again, another rarity. Ceredigion is the furthest south in Britain for the species. They're at Cors Caron still, and still around the Tregaron area up to here. And they're at Cors Focno as well. But if you go into England, you won't find them until you get to the North Pennines, Cumbria, and into Scotland, because they feed on this. They feed on cotton grass, which is quite unusual for a butterfly really to have adapted to feed on a plant like that. Does anyone know what the berry is? Just go. So that's wild cranberry, and you'll only find those growing on very boggy areas as well. My daughter will eat anything that's really tart, and they are exceptionally tart. They've got the texture of a radish. They're quite hard, but with a very tart taste. You have to eat them when they've rotted and gone black, and that's when you have to eat them. So we tend to know where all these things are now because she's quite happy to go and look for stuff if it's food, it would seem. Maybe that's a sort of natural thing that goes back to the Neolithic or something. I don't know. Yeah, I think that's all to say about that, really. Yeah. Okay, so this is the aerial photo of the first picture that we showed of Vigan Blind Brevi, above Llanelli Brevi. So the bog is in here, but all of this photo is about 20 years after they did the felling, I think. And you can still see the sort of scars from the forestry, but it will recover in time. But basically, that was planted probably in the 50s or 60s and really shouldn't have been, because they would have put big ditches in to try and drain it to get the conifers planted, but it largely failed. And I think even in here, it looks like there's evidence perhaps of some planting in there too. I think the other thing to say about this is about 350, 400 metres up in the Cambrians, and if it weren't for the forestry, this area which consists entirely of semi-natural habitats, bogs, dry acidic grasslands, heathland, that sort of thing, because from an agricultural point of view, they're very difficult to improve. You can try and drain them, you can try to fertilise them and so on, but all you end up doing is changing these habitats into some of the other sort of semi-natural habitats we've seen. So in that respect, taking cattle off some of these upland areas and stopping cutting hay has actually reduced the biodiversity. So they tend to be more of a sort of monoculture of purple moorgrass really. And that's this sort of yellowy colour is purple moorgrass. The name's a bit misleading. It's only called purple moorgrass because in the spring it's got a purple top to it. It's really orangey yellow most of the year. So there you go. I think that is that. So this is from Llanafan. So that photo we had of the cotton grass dominated area, that's all down in here. So that's the bog overlying the lake. I don't know if you know Llanafan, but that's the folly that's built there. I won't go into that story. That's a different lecture entirely. But look it up.
Intrigued.
Look it up. But there's lots within this photo. Although I'm talking about lakes here, there's a lot of habitat to be seen within that photo, which is the reason I used it really. But yeah, that just lists some of the different habitats. Yeah, so that is a terrible photo. That is water lobelia, which is a rare plant, which is actually one of the reasons why this lake is designated as not just a site of special scientific interest, but a national nature reserve. So this is designated an NNR because it has more than one qualifying habitat. So it's got the lake, the open water, and these sorts of species like water lobelia and floating water plantain. But it also is designated for all the other habitats around as well, the bog, the acid grassland, and so on. This is marsh lousewort. Lousewort is a species which grows on coarse. Marsh lousewort grows on much wetter areas, so this is found around the edges of the lake. In the middle, the dragonfly is a black darter, which is a typical sort of upland acidic lake species. You won't really, if you go back into England, you'll find it in Shropshire and places like that where there's more sort of upland. As soon as you go into lowland England, you won't find this species at all. And in the bottom corner is a water vole, which is still there, thankfully. We don't think there's mink up there, but there's a decent population of water vole around the margins of the lake, and there's lots of burrows and runs and so on. This is also the source of the River Aeron. It comes out down this way as a ditch about that wide before it makes its way down. What else is there? That's it, I think. And that's just a map of it. So there's the lake itself. This is all the boggy area of common to the south, more common up to the north. This is our land holding. We own a fair bit up there. But on that area, the National Nature Reserve and the Triple SI up there are about 400 hectares, but that's only a tiny fraction of the original common, which was enclosed, I think, in the 1830s. It's quite interesting up there. There's lots of abandoned little farmhouses, crofts, and so on, where obviously when it was enclosed by the then commoners that bought bits of land or were tenants, they almost all of those farms, I'd say 1 in 4 of the buildings up there survived, but 3 in 4 they couldn't support themselves and left. I believe a lot of the people from here went to Cardigan and then over to Patagonia. From what there was a specific steamer, the name of which I can't remember the name of, but a lot of them went from this area because they just couldn't survive on the poor quality land. But you can make out the areas that are common quite clearly on this. This is improved. I say improved, it's not that improved, but it's better than that in terms of agriculture. But yeah, the yellower and browner, it tends to represent more natural habitat than bright green, which tends to be agricultural, modern agricultural land. What else is on there? Yeah, so this area that I was talking about, the Schwingmoor, which is the floating vegetation. From talking to a couple of people, this has visibly increased in size in the last 30, 40 years or so. So I don't know if you know the history of Cors Caron, but it was a glacial lake that over the years has filled in, and then the peat dome has advanced over the top. Even though this is probably a glacial lake as well, the same sort of thing's happening here. It's just 10,000 years later than Cors Caron for whatever reason. I think probably at Cors Caron there was a lot of silt coming in from the mountains around, whereas here the only water flowing into it is from there, and that's it. So it's basically rainwater fed, I think. Rivers, right, I'll quickly go through. So I've not got many to go, don't worry. This is Griguignon in Cwmystwyth, up by Pontrhydygroes. It's called Gro Ystwyth, which is the Triple SI name, and it's designated as a special scientific interest for its braided river system. Have any of you been to Griguignon? Yeah. So you'll sort of recognise it's got this different look to it in terms of the river itself. In the lowlands, in fact, I was going to say it's rare, but it's not. It's unique in the lowlands. You only tend to find this in the Highlands of Scotland. I think this is the only example. Yeah, south of Scotland, I think that's right. And that really is to do with the steepness of Cwmystwyth, the amount of water that comes down. Just lots of shingle being dropped out. So the riverbed is constantly changing position. So there's a lot of species associated with it in particular. Again, it's because of that specific habitat where it's constantly being eroded and opened up. So a lot of species don't like competition. The rarer species will only grow, they're only small things. So where you've got bigger, taller grasses, they won't survive. This, again, not a great photo, but this is called sheep's bit. Sometimes called sheep's bit scabious, but it's not a scabious, it's not related to devil's bit scabious, which is the one that Marsh Rotary feed off. This is called sheep's bit. It grows here, but actually its habitat, the conditions it requires are not sort of gravel on riverbeds, it just doesn't like anything else to compete with it. So anything where there's bare soil really, or bare ground. I can't now even read what that species says. Hang on. It's called Arctosa cinerea, which is I think it's a raft spider, but it only, again, is only found on these areas of gravel, river gravel. And the lichen on the end is, what was that? That's a cladonia, yeah. So you get a lot of these cladonia species, they grow on trees and heathlands and so on, but this one is a specialist within the this river shingle. Of course, there's far more common things associated with this, such as otter, but I wanted to sort of point out that it's that open nature of a river that's keeping all these other species. Again, it's the edges of the river that are perhaps more important. The other thing in Cwmystwyth as well is that a number of the specific plant species that grow there, the very small plant species, are things that grow on what are called calaminarian grasslands, which are metal-rich grasslands because of metal pollution. So this area will be high in lead and zinc and all sorts of things you wouldn't want to ingest, should we say. That's just it in map form. You can quite clearly see there's this open piece of habitat surrounded by forestry, grassland, improved grassland and so on. So the river keeps itself open, which allows all these other species to be able to grow there. In the past, it would have been more open. We would have had large grazing animals that were native and things like beaver and so on. Again, reintroduction of species is another talk in itself. Woodland, I think we've just got woodland and then, I think that's it then. This is in Cymreidol, this is Coed Shimddi Lloyd, wood of the grey chimney, because within this woodland there was lead mining and the chimneys were from the processing of the ore. What I want to point out about woodland is, people, if you look at this, you've got dense woodland and then very open grazed habitat fields up there. People, I think, misunderstand the idea of the wildwood, what it looked like. It doesn't look like this. It also definitely doesn't look like that. But if you go into the woodland, that's the waterfall. It's remarkably open, and that is a fairly normal piece of the woodland. This woodland is basically a heathland with trees on. Again, you've got that sort of shift between, and going back thousands of years when you had large grazing animals roaming freely, it would have been a lot more open. The woodlands, yes, there would have been a lot of trees, but it's a collection of trees, not a woodland as we would necessarily recognise it. We've created these distinct areas of woodland. In the case of Cymreidol, because the wood was needed for the metal extraction industry, mining and processing, pit props and charcoal and so on. So it's slightly artificial, it should be more open. Lots of invertebrates associated with woodland, lichens, mosses, but what I would say is most of the rarities, the invertebrates in particular, like most insects, they require warmth and sunlight. which you don't get in the middle of a dark, you know, if you think of a conifer plantation or something, they're very poor for species because it isn't a natural, it's not a naturalistic habitat. This woodland will begin to collapse in time and open itself up. I won't go into the details of why it's going through what it's going through, but it's going through a process of change based on past management. But it would become more open in time, and that's the sort of thing we would look to encourage in the management of it. This is, so we looked at a sort of acidic woodland there, heathy woodland. This is a more traditional woodland. This is near Aberystwyth, what we call bluebell woodland. Again, I've already mentioned the sort of I've talked about the historical management and so on. This is a coppice woodland, which almost all of our woodlands were. Even though this oak tree is a veteran tree now, and quite large, it looks like it could have been an old coppice still 250 years ago, perhaps. And again, another success story, I suppose, pine marten in the top corner. Dormouse, which are rare in West Wales, but they are around. They're in a sort of low density through the woodlands, and pied flycatcher, which again is another Welsh sort of stronghold. It's a stronghold species for Wales, I suppose. And that's just showing you Conchinley within the context of Cymreidol. All the valley floor is agricultural because it's flat, and all the steep valley sides have been left as woodland because it wasn't very good for agriculture. It's not a natural. The woodland isn't natural, it's been retained and manipulated by people, if you like. Yeah, okay. And there's a few, I'm not going to talk too much about other habitats. There are lots of other habitats. We've got cliffs, we've also got marine habitats, which I'm not even going to mention, there's too much to say. Agricultural habitats, you know, hedgerows, and fields, they are a man-made habitat, even though they're sort of derived from natural-istic things. This is Nantamok here, this is up on Penlimon. This sort of, you know, bare rock is a habitat in its own right with lots of lichens on, but it's mimicked by things like this cloud, which are artificial. The same lichens, the same species will grow on them. The ruined tractors, because that's an old quarry. Again, another habitat is creating bare rock. So a lot of processes, a lot of post-industrial landscapes can be very good for wildlife. But of course then there's this last there, and sand dunes and estuarine habitats, beaches and so on. But far too much to talk about. And this is just a view of course Caron from up on the hill. This is the last one I think. We've mentioned wildwood theory a little bit. People should think perhaps differently about habitats. We've gone through all this thing of defining habitats in this talk, but actually they're all intermingled and they change and they shift. Of course, Caron is fairly naturalistic. It's quite a big area, but around it would have been woodlands and more open woodlands, which we call wood pasture because they graze. A lot of our traditional farming practices up until the 1950s, 60s, and to some extent in some of the areas still around here, mimic some of those natural habitats. Hay meadows mimic grassland glades within woodlands. Heathlands are quite natural in many ways. So we shouldn't be too negative. There's still a lot of land that's fairly good for wildlife and can work with farming and agriculture. And like I say, there's still very large areas of semi-natural habitat remaining in Britain, in Wales. I know we keep getting these very low scores on the news for our biodiversity and intactness, but I can't help but think they're slightly flawed because when you look at the figures, 74% of upland Wales is still in what you would consider to be a semi-natural habitat state. And 19% of the lowlands, which is far higher than many Western European countries. So I don't know quite how they score some of these things, but I slightly disagree. There's an example there. Corsicaron is 862 hectares, and the Llanafan triple SI, which is the main Cambrian Mountains one, at 22,700 hectares, is over 1% of Wales. So there's a lot there that's fairly intact. It's just trying to think of how to manage these things appropriately, perhaps. I think that's it. You'll be pleased to know. Yeah, that's it. We're not going to do that.
I'm thinking we're going to put coffee on and tea and have some cake.
Yeah.